I'm sorry, who did you say you were?
My name is Mr. Charles. You remember me, don't you?
Hi there everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is the Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to raving and ranting about board games, but usually more the latter. I make no apologies about how long this video is going to take. It's probably going to take a while to talk about Unconscious Mind. I had some connections with the development of this game, at least from a small perspective. During its early stage and late stage, I did remember playtesting this at least 2 if not 3 times and suggesting some improvements that could be made. Some went in, some didn't, but you know, I have seen this from like its early stages and now I get to play it and give it the beans in its final stages. It's not often I do that for a lot of games because I tend to prefer to play games when they're out rather than play them in advance, but I do make some exceptions, typically with Awakened Realms, but you know, certainly with this one I was like, ooh, okay, this is interesting, tell me more as life goes on. And this one's been in development for quite a while. I mean, the Kickstarter I think was a while ago and it's only just recently started coming out, you know, for fulfillment for backers, and it was at Essen, so I don't know when this will get a retail release, but hopefully in the near future. But now I get a chance to give this one the beans and see what I think. Could it be one of the best heavy Euros we've had in a while, or is it more a case of style over substance?
Get on with it.
Right, where do I even begin? Firstly, how does the game end? Basically, you have a reputation track, which is signified by Freud and all your markers. When you gain reputation by various means of the game, Freud's marker will move along, which increases the bonuses that this track can provide, but also yours will increase, which increases the bonuses you can grab as well as potentially more victory points. When Freud's marker drops off the end, you pay another turn each and total up the victory points. But the main stuff that you're doing in the game revolves around predominantly a worker placement system with the use of these little speech bubbles or ideas essentially. And you have a choice. You can either place these ideas down, worker placement style, to trigger actions, or you can recall them, so it's dynamic worker placement, people will take their stuff off at different times, or you can treat clients in your office. We'll get onto that in a minute. But the idea with placing ideas down is that you have this worker placement board with the different action spots and some tiles that will be available to grab as the game goes on. And in order to place something on a worker, they have the spots with the little spokes poking at different bits. You place down 1 or 2 ideas on a spot, and this allows you to take the action once or twice, depending on how many ideas you put down. You also have these bright idea little light bulb tokens that you can grab, which can substitute, so they're cool things to have as well. But the actions revolve around mostly 4 different kind of aspects. First, you got the notebook tiles. These notebook tiles you grab and they sit on your own player board, slot into the slots. They give you bonuses when you grab them, but mainly they give you stuff that you can trigger, which we'll get onto in a minute. On top of that, you have the way to grab insights, which is kind of the crux of how you treat patients. You each have a circular dial. These insights represent freedom, passion and growth, whatever. I mean, it's, you know, it's purple, green and red for the most part, but these insights are in minor, medium or major levels, and as you grab them, you basically move them up the various tracks on your dial. You can manipulate them in various ways during the game, but this is kind of like the currency for how to treat clients. You also get to move your marker and potentially Freud's around this map of, I believe it's Vienna actually. And the idea is that there is a circular rondel here of the locations. Freud goes around at his own pace, triggered by players, but players will also move around clockwise around here. And these locations give you different bonuses that you can trigger, and it's all based on either how many different pawns are in the same location, or a sort of semi-set collection mechanic of tags, where the different locations, like the coffee shop has, you know, the coffee mug is a tag. If you've got a bunch of those tags, then you get to trigger the action multiple times. It's essentially like how many of the instance do you have, then that's how many actions you get to do, and they're fairly simplistic. And then the last thing that you can do from here is that you can grab, I need to get some out, some research cards. These grant you a bonus when you play them, but they're also 3 different colors, because once you've played some of these out, you are then able to publish journals which require you to get specific books of, well, different cards of different colors, and players can even nick the books from you after you've used them. It gives you a bonus, but they basically have an easier time to publish ones in the future, which kind of makes sense. You cite from somebody and make one a little bit sooner. And that's kind of like a basic overview of the worker placement side. When you recall ideas, you get to gain some coffee, which is kind of like a universal sub-currency for powering different bonus actions. But mainly, you take your ideas off the board and trigger other effects. Then you've got treating your clients. So you have your own little office here, which, whoop, runaway marker. But essentially what happens is that you will have 2 offices. I'm just going to show one office here at the moment. You'll have a client. They give you some special ability at the bottom, a number of points, or some endgame scoring. We'll use this guy here who, as a routine client for the moment. Each one will then have a latent dream and a manifest dream above them. So the dreams are basically different cards, but for the most part, they're just criteria for treating the patient. So let's place that dream there, and then this dream on top as another layer. Your marker will move to the spot, which represents the number of green hearts that you need in order to treat the patient. There is one extra element as well, a grief layer it's called. It's this little translucent thing that you put over the top of the character. Think Rorschach paintings, if you've ever seen those. And this will give you a number of hearts to treat. So in this case, 3 + 2 is 5. I have 5 hearts I need to treat. And then if you want to treat clients, this is when you spend those insight markers. So for example, I need here a major passion and major growth. So the highest level of green and red. If I've got them on my insight dial, I simply spend them and then I get to take the dream off and it cures that many number of hearts on the client. When you reach a certain spot, you trigger what's called catharsis, which removes that top translucent layer, scoring you points and bonus abilities. And once you eventually treat the client fully, you score its victory points and get other benefits besides. But that's kind of like a shorthand version of how you treat clients. And the game basically, there's one other thing to explain first, the inkpot. Besides deciding, I want to go and trigger this action, I also now have to think, well, how far is my inkpot going to move? Because you have this inkpot here on your board, and depending on what space you go to on here triggers how often this thing moves around your board. Where it lands, it basically gets to trigger rows and columns of your notebook tiles, which basically allows you to create kind of like a mini little engine of cool little bonuses and stuff that you can trigger. But how you build this up is entirely up to you. So this is another tactical element of the game while you're also doing other worker placement aspects. So there's quite a bit there for sure, and there's other little bits besides, but that's kind of like a shorthand version of the game. You've got worker placement with these. You can take them off when you want to. You can treat your clients instead of placing workers down, and this carries on in this fashion until enough reputation has been gained by players to drop Freud's marker off the edge of the board, at which point you'll total up all your victory points during this game and from endgame scoring and see who wins.
Boy.
Wow, I could have been here until next Tuesday with that, and yeah, that's certainly one of the pros of this game, but with a caveat. This is definitely a very thinky game. This is the most thinky game that Fantasia has ever put out. Forget Endless Winter. Endless Winter is a baby compared to the amount of thinking and stuff you need to know for this one. I would actually dare say I could compare this to the likes of a Mind Clash game, or at least the Lacerda, somewhere around that level. It's definitely in that heavy ballpark. There's a lot of moving parts in this game. A lot of, I need A to get to B to do C, and, for some people that might be a little bit too much for them. So you gotta bear this in mind. This is a heavy game through and through. If you're not used to heavy games, and I'm talking heavy games, this one might put you off or be a little bit hard for you to get to grips with, especially in your first game. Your first game is going to be a learning experience one way or the other. But once you've got the grasping of the game, it's very rewarding in its mechanics though. There's a lot of cool things happening here. I like worker placement in general, and I like the idea that these spots can be accessed by different spots. You can't go to the same one twice yourself, so you have to kind of diversify your actions before you recall them. And I always love this dynamic worker placement idea. It's stuff in the Energy Empire, the Manhattan Project series, and a few other games where you choose when my workers come off. So if they're blocking other spaces, I might just leave them there for a bit longer. I can do other things, treat clients, or have some other, try some other worker placement spot. But eventually I'm going to have to get them back, but I could do it sooner rather than later. There are pros and cons to doing it. You can trigger other bonuses when you recall ideas back. track. So don't want to do it sooner and later? That's up to you. That's just from a worker placement aspect. Then you've got treating the clients with needing to do this little resource management with the insight dial. You've got the coffee on your board, which is used to, get yourself various bonuses. I mean, this is the amount of coffee you use in this game. I'm surprised people don't get like massive caffeine withdrawals the next day after you play this game.
Of course I've been up all night. Not because of caffeine, it was insomnia. I couldn't stop thinking about coffee. I need a nap. Coffee time!
But, that in itself is good fun. And I particularly like this inkpot mechanic. This idea that this thing is moving around your board and triggering rows and columns, or in one case, the reputation marker, where you can get more bonuses and extra actions from. And not only am I thinking, right, well, I could go to this spot here, but hang on, if I go to that spot, I can access it from there or there. That's moving this thing twice or 3 times. Well, do I want to move it twice or 3 times? I mean, twice I get to trigger the reputation marker. Well, that's not bad, but then if I go to the very top, I can trigger this column, which lets me do X, Y, and Z.
So now I've gone cross-eyed.
Cool, blimey, you are going to be planning your turns out in advance, for quite some time. If you're AP prone or not comfortable with a lot of stuff to think about, you might want to stay the hell away from this game, because I think it's just going to be too overwhelming for you. I can't stress that enough. But, that being said, it's not a massive chore to learn this thing. And I'm not saying, oh yeah, this is easy, you'll be able to learn it in 5 seconds flat. No. But some heavy games fall into a trap where the rulebook is so complicated or so overwrought, or there's far too much to learn that you just can't physically get the game set up and done. I had a problem with Voidfall in that respect, and a few other sort of very heavy games. The rules have got to be good in order to get you learning, and it's got to be something during a game where you're not constantly checking a rule book for little niche rules. There are some niche rules here and there. I'm not going to say this one escapes it entirely, but it does a really good job of getting the rules condensed down to as much as you need to know. It's not a small rule book, it's 24 pages, but there's a lot of different pictorial examples here. Just as much text as you need. Not too much text, but not too little that you can't understand something. It's also laid out quite well. You have the player set up and some key concepts beforehand, so just before you get into the game, but then it will go into like what you do on your turn, then it will talk about the actions, then it will go about recalling your ideas. There's some layout tweaks I might have made, but learning it from the rulebook is actually not as complicated as you might think. I mean, when I got the game, I had to learn it from the rulebook in order to get back into it, and I found it to be a decent experience. It's also helped by the fact that the reference guides that you give to each player are really good in this. You've got one double-sided that gives you every icon in the game. More publishers need to realize this. There's a lot of times you get this icon reference guide and it doesn't give you every icon, in which case what's the point in having the stupid guide in the first place? But here, everything's on there and it gives you a decent explanation for each. But particularly this, every single client effect, all these cards with different abilities and endgame scoring effects are all on this sheet. If you need to look something up in the game, I guarantee you, for the most part, you're going to find it on one of these 2 sheets. So it's only when you need one of those little niche rules that you're going to have to open the rule book back up. And you will have to do this now and again. It's a heavy game, but these 2 are very good guides. And then to top it off, if you're not comfortable with reading the rule book for this thing, you can always check out the video. There is an official tutorial for this done by Paul Grogan. It's not entirely just plugging, but it's an official tutorial, so it's not one of those playthrough and tutorial ones. This is a full-fledged tutorial official for this game done by Paul Grogan.
And I'm his friend Jesus.
The aesthetics are also fantastic in this. I mean, from the artwork to the components. Now, that being said, I don't think, honestly, in my opinion, that you need to worry about the deluxe components.
What?
Because really, the game in its retail form is already really good. You've got these wooden pieces with screen printed meeples, I believe, in the retail version, and they look great. In fact, I prefer these to the deluxe versions. The deluxe version gives you these, plastic models here, which, have some detail, but not a lot, but at a distance, you don't really see much detail with these compared to the wooden ones, and I actually just prefer to use the wood rather than these. And, you've got, some extra, woodified components for your heart-shaped tracker and stuff, whereas you always get the wooden, different idea tokens and that. So there's not a huge amount in the deluxe components that I would say is necessary. The only thing that I go, oh yeah, that's definitely better than the original, is the inkpot. The inkpot is a fairly sort of lightish plastic substitute in this one with not much extra detail on it, whereas here it feels a little bit more weighty. I think it's got a glass component rather than plastic, and it's got the cork in the top. So I do really like the inkpot deluxe versions, but that's kind of a personal preference really. Honestly, I think if you were to just buy this in its retail version, you would get more than enough component quality for your buck.
It is just that the luxury edition has so much more eagle.
Artwork, fantastic. I love this dual idea for artwork. I would like to see this in more games. The idea that because you're doing psychotherapy, you have the real world and the dream world. So the real world is all done by Vincent Dutrait, and as much as I've seen a lot of Vincent Dutrait stuff lately, and I normally say that he's much better at doing scenery and nature than he is doing people, this is probably one of the best examples of Vincent Dutrait's artwork I've seen in a while. The people on these cards and on the boards and that are really well detailed. I mean, so much better. You know, I think I talked about Lord of the Rings Duel of Middle-earth, and I looked at the artwork from him on there, and I thought, I don't know, I'm not as big of a fan of the way he's done people in that. I much prefer the scenery and nature like in Canopy. But here, I mean, you cannot look at these people on the board or on these cards and say, oh yeah, this is subpar artwork. It is fan-frickin-tastic. And then on top of that, you've got another, like, you know, veteran in the artist world, Andrew Bosley, who does all the dream cards. So all these dream cards have got really cool, so, you know, psychedelics, the weird artwork on them, almost like something out of a, you could almost call it Dark Dixit, where it's just that level of uncomfortableness that you're like, what is going on here? But it is, you know, dream world. And the two different art styles, they're very different art styles, but they blend well in this game because you are dealing with reality versus dreams, and it just works. I'd love to see this used more often.
You get to make and break the rules here.
Insert-wise, this is a deluxe box. It gives you all the storage guide instructions on the side, so you can easily get it back in there. And the insert does a pretty good job of holding everything in place, though maybe I would have liked maybe a little bit more separation for things like cards, because you do have to group a few things together a little bit more often than not, but it's not a big deal. It's kind of minor. For the most part, setting this game up is actually not that big of a chore compared to some other heavy games, because the insert does a good job for it, and you're inevitably going to forget how to pack it all away at the end. Well, the storage guides on the side, separated by base game, player tray, even the expansions if you've got the deluxe version, they do a good job. It's just a really great production.
Really spectacular, spared no expense.
Now I mentioned there's a lot of moving parts. You've got the locations, you've got the worker placement aspect here. Not all of them are as good as each other. There's certainly a bit of a mismatch with the balancing of, you know, do I like them as much as others? But I'll certainly talk about my favorite part is probably this board, your player board. Not just the inkpot movement, but the notebook tiles of the engine building aspect. Because there's a lot of these tiles. This is just a fraction of what you get in here. And you can create all sorts of weird and wonderful little engines here, both in row and column form, where you get to trigger all sorts of cool bonuses, and it makes you want to aim your inkpot for that particular row or column because you know you're going to trigger all sorts of cool stuff. But then that also affects what actions you're going to do in the game, and it's just quite cool that you'll always create some different kind of engine every time you play this game. And, you know, whether it's level 1 or level 2 tiles, level 2 are a bit more costly but a bit more rewarding. The fact that you can access either of them at a time means that, you know, you can decide whether you want to go for easy stuff or more costly stuff on here. It's just a cool little system to go with everything. Which also means that there's quite a few paths to victory that you can take, and I tend to see that they all work to some extent. I mean, you can go mad with your player board and build up a full notebook in, like, you know, 10 seconds flat and revolve around that. You'll score a lot of points for it. You need to cure 1 or 2 clients before you can fill up the entire thing, but you'll have this really cool engine that you can manipulate around. You've got also the clients that you're treating. I mean, you can try and treat as many of these as physically possible. You know, these will give you bonuses, but also endgame scoring for, you know, some of the clients, or lots of the tags for locations or special abilities. So you can start scoring a lot of points just by treating clients for an extent. I mean, you're going to do some of it as the game goes on regardless, but you could really focus on it. Other aspects, you've got these, you know, the treatises or treatises. I just call them journals, it's a lot easier. But, you know, these things that you can print out, these can score you a lot of points. And if you get there first, people might cite off you later and give you more points besides. So there's that little, whoop, there you go, a couple of escaping there. There's that little aspect. But then you've also got the reputation track. And some people like to say that the reputation track doesn't really amount to anything. You should have seen my points in the last game I played. It was about 180 or so points. I demolished the other 3 players that were there. Granted, 2 of them were new, 1 of them wasn't. But with that one, I made a thing of going around my player board, like, you know, like Speedy Gonzales, you know, unlocking my ideas, but also getting a lot of reputation from some location bonuses and other aspects where, you know, my marker would be ahead of others. But what I was doing was that I was triggering the track quite regularly. So not only does that feed me a lot of victory points, but it also gained me actions like getting, you know, heart-shaped boxes and research cards and more notebook tiles for free, rather than having to worry about doing it on here. It's not as evident at first. You think to yourself, well, what's so great about it? But when you start triggering the track often, when your reputation marker is high enough, you do notice a bit of that action economy come in, and so it's another way to do well at the game.
Ah, smug mode.
But there are a few negatives to talk about. Firstly, we're going to talk about variability. Now, I mentioned that there are a few different sort of paths to victory that you can go for, but that was pretty much the limit I talked about there. But I'm talking about more the setup of the game. The variety is kind of not overly present. Yes, you've got a lot of these dream cards, you've got a bunch of these clients now, but there's not a huge amount of clients. I mean, all the clients are basically on one reference sheet. So you've got this many routine ones, and you've got that many case study ones for the endgame scoring. It's not a lot. I mean, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12. So 12 of the case study ones, and the same for the other ones. So only 12 of each client. That's not a lot. I would have liked to have seen more clients and more variable effects, or maybe just, you know, duplicate a few of them, but there's really not that many in the game. On top of that, all these different dream cards. Yeah, it's cool looking at this weird dark version of Dixit with all the artwork, and in my case I've got the hollow foil ones from the deluxe set, which again, look really nice, but you don't need them, the retail's just fine. But really all these are is just basically telling you it needs this many insights to treat this many hearts and get you a bonus. You'll make some decisions like, you know, do the little symbols at the top match your client in grief layer, in which case you get more hearts treated and stuff, but other than that, it's mainly just a case of what insights do I do well at. This is the ones I'm going to aim for, but you don't really notice a huge amount of variety in these because they are basically just a lot of cool pictures, but with the same spend X and get Y type thing, so you don't get as much there. The location map, yeah, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different locations, but there's really only 2 variations in terms of the bonuses they give you, and even then some of those kind of rinse repeat, so even the map isn't as exciting as it could be. I mean, it's useful, it's good to get these location bonuses and stuff, but you don't necessarily feel like, you know, one location is that different from another. It's just a case that if you want certain district bonuses and stuff, you're going to have to aim for purple, red, or green. And, you know, it just would have been cool maybe if these were a little bit more unique to make one side of the board very different from the other. But nah, it kind of gives off the impression that most of Vienna is kind of all the same, really. I mean, I've only passed through Vienna. Actually, have I been to Vienna? I feel like I've passed through it once, but, you know, I digress. It's, you know, so there's like some little aspects here and there. These action spots, they never change. They'll always be the same in every game. The notebook tiles is probably the biggest form of variety you'll get because they'll come out at different times and you won't get through them all. Yes, there's ways to score points if a stack runs out, but in a 4-player game, that's pretty much the only way it's going to happen. And even then, it's not often that the stacks will run out. So your notebook tiles are kind of the main form of variety. Location goals, they're all the same. You know, every single one is the same. These things, they're all the same. They get you points, but that's about it. The research cards, they give you a little bonus each, but other than that, that's kind of all they do. So variety is, there's a bit of it, but not a ton. You are mainly here for the mechanics and the journey, and you're not necessarily going to get a very different setup every time.
Well, that's a lot less hot.
This game's also going to be quite a long one, and boy am I serious in that fact. Woo-wee! The box dares, and I mean dares, to put 60 to 120 minutes on that box.
105? Yeah, in your bra.
Good friggin' Christ tap dancing luck with that. Yeah, you are not gonna play this game in that range with the assumption that that is for 1 to 4 players. It's not going to happen. A solo game of this took me multiple hours to play. Not just because of learning the rules, but because there's a lot to do. But 2 players is never gonna play this in 60 minutes. It is never gonna happen. It is physically impossible to play this in 2 hours with 4 players. There's a lot going on, a lot of combos triggering, a lot of setup, a lot of rules teach. I mean, this is definitely not including setup and rules in that time, but even then, 120 minutes is it's tricky to do at the best of times. I mean, 90 minutes? God blimey. I mean, I've got a 3-player game of this coming up tonight, you know, with 2 new players. I guarantee that is not going to take 90 minutes with the 3 of us. It's going to take longer. This is easily more in the lines of 120 to, you know, 180 minutes, really. You're talking bare absolute minimum. Solo, maybe 90 minutes if you know this game inside and out, which is very difficult to do because of how heavy and fraught it is. But you're easily looking at 2 to 3 hours with a multiplayer game. Certainly 3 hours with, you know, 4 players is potential, possibly even longer if you're all learning the game. And it's not helped by the fact that there is a little bit of an issue with the reputation timer, because the timer track is all based on players getting reputation, but there's no fixed rounds in the game. So players get reputation in different games at different paces. There's a few like smidgens of reputation that you can get nice and early just to get it like moving a little bit. But if you focus on stuff that doesn't necessarily get you reputation, you're not advancing the game timer. And if other players are also thinking along those lines, then the game timer's not moving very fast at all. You know, you get a couple at the start for location bonuses when you recall ideas. That's about it, okay? That will get it started. But then the rest of your reputation requires you to do things like fill up your entire board with notebook tiles, which can still take you a while, or to achieve these different location goals. And these location goals aren't short-term things. I mean, getting multiple clients cured, you know, getting multiple journals cured. I think the easiest one out of the lot is unlocking all 3 of your ideas on your board. You know, the ones that are, you know, locked at the top of your board when the game starts. All you got to do is just get your inkpot to go around 3 times. That doesn't take that long. But the game may speed up quicker if everybody goes heavy on reputation, or it may drag out a lot longer if people purposely, or whatever reason they have, avoid stuff that gets them reputation, and so the timer doesn't move as fast. I kind of maybe feel that this game would have been better if it just had a fixed number of rounds, or maybe, like, you know, you could say every so many turns, reputation marker moves, and then eventually the game is going to end after this many turns unless somebody triggers it earlier. So maybe that there needed to be a cap in some way, something that says, right, the game is going on way too long, Freud's getting sick and tired of you guys, taking forever, he goes off and the game ends, you know, by way of a standard cap.
That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard, you imbecile.
Downtime can also be a little bit of an issue when, particularly in 3 and 4 players, when some turns can just take a long time. This game enables you to do certain actions twice, or location actions up to 5 times. In the late game, this can result in some turns taking a long time to resolve. I mean, you've got the location action. If you want the location action to trigger twice, then the first time you do it, you go, right, I'm going to move this here, and now I've got 5 tags, so I can do this 5 times. Well, I'll get one of those, maybe one of those, and then I can convert that to there, Right, now I'm going to move the location again. Right, I get 4 things there. Right, I'm going to get that one, that one, that one, and that one, and it's like, oh, blimey. These turns can take a while. The downtime for this can be quite high in between your turns. Now, granted, you've got a lot to plan for, but still, this adds to the length problem, where this one is definitely going to be a lengthy affair, and sometimes you will have a turn that goes really quickly, and sometimes you'll have a turn that takes friggin' forever to end.
Get on with it!
The game is also one hell of a table hog. Whoo-wee, I mean, I am struggling just to get stuff on this desk in order to give you a basic idea. But when you've got this out, you have got this board, you have got this board, you have got the different cards and, you know, the dream cards and all the case study cards, the grief layer cards, you've got to put stuff for these journals, you've got to have, you know, everybody's player board, which is obviously a big thing, and they've got their own board, they've got their office, which has to go next door, which then has to have this massive, great big insight dial next to it. So yeah, you can see how much space this thing is taking up. It is kind of insane.
Please excuse the crudity of this model. I didn't have time to build it to scale or to paint it.
The solo mode is kind of 50-50 as well. It was kind of difficult to decide which category to put it in, because on the one hand, the solo mode is not particularly hard to learn. I mean, you've got another rule book here. You can go to a tutorial video with a playthrough, but you essentially have an AI that you do pilot, the ID that it's called. Most of the stuff it doesn't collect. It essentially converts everything into coffee, and it keeps spending coffee as frequently as it physically can in order to treat clients as quickly as it can. You know, other than that, it has some tiles for notebooks that it uses rather than you that have the same effects each game, but they might be in different locations. And all in all, it's not a difficult AI to learn. The reason it's 50-50 though is because for the first half of the game you're going, oh, I get to do all my cool stuff, and yeah, okay, I'll do that little bit for the AI, yeah, cool, do my stuff, do that bit for the AI, fine, and it doesn't necessarily take that long to pilot it. even though it's sucking up a lot of your table space. Then you get into the mid to late game. Hoo-wee, yeah, does this thing suddenly start becoming a bit of a chore to pilot. Not because there's loads of rules, but because the amount of stuff this thing triggers is insane. You're already burnt out trying to deal with all the stuff that's triggering on your side. But when you get to the late game and this thing's got like, you know, multiple different tiles out, all these effects are triggering off, it's got to trigger coffee like every 5 seconds, because basically it's like, oh, I get in a bunch of this, coffee, 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 spend, 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 coffee, coffee, spend, 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 coffee, spend, coffee, spend, spend. Just a coffee churning machine. And then on top of that, you're thinking, well, hang on, now it's got to treat all the clients at the end with all these heart-shaped boxes. 1, 2, 3. All right, that's treated catharsis. Right, that's got to do that grief layer. That's just gave him more bonuses, gained him more coffee. That's now got to convert into this. Right, he's got more hearts. Right, that's treated the client now. Right, okay, I've got to put this in front of him. Now I need to sort out his dreams, his new client. It becomes a bit overwrought, and you know, you need to be comfortable with that. The AI is still fun to play, and I could certainly see myself playing it again, you know, as time goes on, but I'd have to learn a few of the rules again, which is a little bit of a chore. But also I'm just a little bit wary because I think there's quite a lot to do, and I even said this in my SETI review. As much as I gave that a really high score, you know, high, you know, very low 10, high 9, effectively averaging in that area, you know, even I said that AI had quite a lot to do when it started getting into the late game. This is more than that was. So if you thought that one took a lot to pilot in the late game, this is on a whole other level, mainly because of how complex and heavy the game is. I mean, this is still quite a few steps above the likes of SETI in terms of complexity. So the solo mode is decent, and I think it's a well-designed solo mode, but you gotta be comfortable with this game. You gotta know how to trigger all these effects, and you gotta keep your thinking cap on, because for all I know, I have got the score on in every solo game I've played, because relying on the idea that you got every single rule and trigger right in the right order,
That's very unlikely.
So I do find myself really enjoying this one. It is a very solid game. It is one that has got your thinking cap on. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of different moving parts and lots of cool combos that you can trigger. But there is that aspect of some of the variety being a little bit mismatched here and there. It is definitely going to be a long one. I don't know how often I'll be able to teach this to new players, because they're going to have to go through a massive learning chog in order to actually get the game sort of to grips with. And the solo mode is also going to be one that is difficult for me to pilot on a regular basis because of just how many things you've got to trigger for the AI. It's heavy and it's complex, but it's not what I would call the smoothest game in the world. It's going to grind its gears a little bit, you know, and certainly make you have to pay attention to what it is you're doing and what is triggering at any particular point. But the gameplay is rewarding. I love the worker placement. I love your board. I love the inkpot aspect. The map is probably the weakest element, but I like that there's plenty for me to think about and do in this game. So it is really solid, but I am umming and ahhing between two scores, and it is tricky to decide. I think I gotta give a little bit of tough love on this one and think that, you know, people gave me a hard time for giving SETI a 10, and in hindsight, maybe that one probably should have been a high 9. This one is definitely what I would consider to be a high 8. This is an 8 out of 10 for me. It's a great game, you know, maybe just shy of a distinction level, you know, a little bit of streamlining here and there could have helped, you know, a cap on the length could have helped, and maybe just make the map element a little bit more interesting than it actually is. But what this game gets right, it does very, very well, and it's still one that I want to keep. This is still a game I want to play, you know, reasonably often, because I do get a good kick out of it, and it's certainly one of the better games I've played this year. You know, is it top 10 worthy? We'll have to see, but you know, definitely I've enjoyed my time with it and I want to play it more. But I know it's a lot of effort to get it played, and certainly maybe just a little bit of streamlining here and there could have helped matters. But still, a strong 8. It's definitely one that I recommend if you're a heavy gamer, one if you want a more interesting theme than just dry bones Euro trading in the Mediterranean or raising up a church track or whatever. You know, this one is on par with the likes of Mind Clash and Lacerda in terms of its complexity and its amount of rules, but you know, it's not that big a chore to learn because it's got a good rulebook and it's got good tutorials available on the internet. So by all means, give this one a shot. It's worth a try. It's not going to be for everybody, but it certainly won me over. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Check out the rest of my content. I've done Black Forest and SETI as I mentioned. I believe I probably did Endless Winter a while back from Fantasia Games, so by all means check that out. Let me know your thoughts on Unconscious Mind. I have seen some very divisive opinions on this on Board Game Geek and a few other places. You know, some really love it, some were a little bit disappointed by aspects. You know, did you like it? Did you hate it? I want to know your thoughts. Get them down in the comments and let's talk. Until next time, remember, regardless of whether you're dreaming about a violin in the distance with 2 hot air balloons or rabbits and foxes on stilts, yeah, there is some weird stuff in here, it's still only a game, so bye for now.